How's it going? Welcome to episode 235 of On the Wire. I am Adam Howe, joined as usual by Kevin Hastings, and we have a fun little off-the-cuff, unscripted show for you today as Kevin is past the halfway point of his first full draft of the 2026 season. NFBC 50s, for those who are not aware, that is a draft and hold format where you draft 50 rounds worth of players and no free agent pickups throughout the year. So you've got plenty of bench spots to kind of play with. Your bench, your deep bench is your free agent pool that you don't have to spend any money on. So that'll be fun. We are also just about to finish up our PL2 early mock draft as well. That is a 12-teamer in a Yahoo-style format, head-to-head, 12-team, one catcher league, no middle, no corner, 3 outfielders, 2 utilities, and a bunch of pitchers. So very different formats, very different styles, but still some nice takeaways that I think we can take from these first 25 or 23 rounds of each one of those drafts. But Kevin, you were just itching. You were texting me constantly about the rooms that were available, the ones you were thinking about going, and you finally pulled the trigger and jumped in without me, which is perfectly fine. How's it going? How's it feel to get back right into it?
It's going great, Adam. Not as great as it is going for Seattle Mariners fans at the moment, as we're recording here on Monday evening. Game 7 of the ALCS, and Big Dumper just went yard, giving Seattle a 2-run lead. Now they were up 2-1, now 3-1 as we're recording. So, yeah, just been a blast watching these postseason games, Adam. Hopping in a draft, looking at some other draft boards I'm seeing people posting, the mock draft we're doing with the Pitcher List podcast hosts has been a blast so far. We're down to our last pick in that draft. So yeah, just a lot of baseball and a lot of fun watching, drafting, all of it.
Yeah. Very, very different drafts, as I alluded to already, and we'll kind of jump around back and forth. But I want to start with this draft. I've got it on the board. I've got the board up here. For all those who have either a large enough screen and or can squint, you can make out the majority of the board. But what's nice is that, the color coding of the boards on NFBC makes it, generally speaking, really easy to kind of see the flow of positions that are going, the runs that you see, the gold runs you see with pitcher runs, and when all your catchers are going, et cetera, et cetera. So let's take the low-hanging fruit first and foremost. Any big surprises in the first round that you noticed? Again, we don't get to talk about the first 20 rounds of most like throughout the course of the season, so I'm going to milk that whenever I can. We don't need, because there are plenty of other podcasts out there that are doing very much so all of their focus on the first round. But anything major that surprised you, somebody jumped somebody a little bit earlier, or everything kind of just fell into place like the way you kind of expect?
There's really only one big surprise to me, and that was Ronald Acuna Jr. Being the 4th overall pick. That was a little surprising. I had considered, I had the 2nd pick in the draft, and I considered Juan Soto even ahead of Aaron Judge and Bobby Witt Jr. I think people might be a little surprised at how good of a season Juan Soto had. If you weren't a Yankees fan or have him rostered on one of your fantasy teams.
Yeah.
And so with the injury coming back, and yeah, we saw the power, not as much of the speed, kind of backwards from last time we saw Ronald Acuna Jr. come back from major injury. It could be a great pick. I just think it's riskier than it needed to be, I guess, is where I was at there. So that was a little surprising to me, that Ronald Acuna Jr. going 4th overall. Ellie De La Cruz, I know a lot of people think bounce back. I probably lean that way as well, but I thought he might have slipped a little later in the first, but that's really nitpicking. Yeah, really the only big surprise to me was Ronald Acuna Jr. at 4. I hadn't even considered him, seeing him come off the board at that point. So that's why it was surprising to me as well. It's just like, personally, I hadn't considered him yet at that point.
I think the one I had that was not surprising, but was just to see him jump up so fast, so early, is second round Junior Caminero, with just how he kind of jumped onto the scene so quickly. He was also picked, I believe, in the second round in our mock draft. Again, 12-teamer still, but very different format. And Nick Pollock, who drafted him, he asked the questions like, did I jump too early? And it was crickets. Like, nobody really wanted to answer him. And
no, because nobody knows yet, right?
Yes. And his logic was sound. And I think that kind of leads us into the next kind of like overall thoughts that we were talking about off air, is that third base looked pretty weak, or at least top heavy. And if you didn't get one of those top guys, you're like, all right, well, let's just roll the dice and see what happens later on. So with that being said, like, that goes into the overall thought process of, Kevin, do you focus on early on in your draft? Do you focus on those positions, or do you still let the cards fall where they lay? And if you don't happen to not, are you going to push up a third baseman? Whether it's a whole round, a half a round, just to like get that position filled up. Or again, you're just like going to let things kind of fall where they lay.
Well, I think it's more in terms, and this being, my first draft of this format of the season, that's going to be a lot of the value of this draft is seeing some of these trends, and then being able to formulate a plan based on having more information, right? Like we talked about this a lot last off season, and I love the way that Nick Pollock would always phrase it: have a plan for second base. He didn't say you had to take an early second baseman. You have to have a plan. And so I think that is definitely the case with both second base again and third base this season, which is pretty common for third base as well, being a little top heavy in recent years. I was sweating. I was telling you off air, I was sweating it. I'd been bypassing third baseman, and it got to the point where when Addison Barger was falling and I needed him to fall just a couple of more spots, because I felt like if I got him where I did, 14th round, towards the end of the 14th round, that I'd be fine and perfectly happy having been able to wait on third base to this point. But if I hadn't got him, things were getting pretty slim at that point for my first third baseman. So I think, yes, the way Nick has phrased it for second base in the past, I'm that way with both second base, third base, and I'm a little thin at outfield so far in this draft as well. I'm the only one that does not have a fifth outfielder so far. I only have 4, and one of those is Jock Caglione. So I'm pretty thin at outfield at the moment as well. So far in this draft, that's my takeaway. I need to have a plan for second base, third base, and outfield.
Fair enough. So we're going to keep going. I'm double checking to make sure I didn't do anything wrong on this recording, because I have a feeling that we are streaming, but I am not recording. And now I'm a little worried that we're going to do this whole thing. And I think we should be fine. All right, cool. Well, I'll edit. You guys all get a little... if you're watching at home and you're not watching the game, or you have us both on, cool, that's awesome. But I'll take this out of the audio version. Yeah, like, I think that, you kind of nailed, like, again, echoing what Nick always says, like, have a plan for second base. It's struggle bus. I mean, just looking at this board and you see the orange, right? Yeah, it's an orange, right? It's like a burnt sienna orange color, whatever. And there obviously is a very large cliff toward the beginning of the draft. And then it's like, oh no, everybody realizes we're kind of screwed if we don't grab something now. And so it's like second base, boom, boom, boom. We've got Albies, you grab Nico, Jackson Holiday's right there, Jorge Polanco is still available, Brandon Lau, Altuve, Kierkegaard, and then you drop another cliff. And whether or not which cliff you actually fell off of is going to make a big difference on how you plan your roster. So yeah, I mean, it's rough. I think a lot of us, where did Mookie go in this draft? He went in the third round, middle of the third round. If Mookie keeps second base eligibility, you think that's enough to move, even with like the overall, as far as Mookie Betts goes, standards, the mediocre season he had in 2025, having second base eligibility in this market, do you think that's enough to have moved Mookie Betts back into the second round?
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. In fact, I might have considered him at the end of the second. I had him queued up in the to if he made it back. It was a long ways. He wasn't going to make it all the way back in the fourth, but obviously he was at the top of my queue just in case. Even though I had Bobby Witt Jr., I'd have snagged a fourth round Mookie Betts as my middle if that is what needed to be done. But yeah, I think second base probably would have bumped him up. Is anybody in a different color that has second base eligibility? Doesn't look like it there.
That's the thing. Yeah,
so Jazz Chisholm and then Ketel Marte, and we don't see another second baseman drafted until the middle of the fifth round. That's kind of crazy to me. Just so, like last season, towards the end of draft season, we talked about this quite a bit, Adam, and we ended up in the point where I think we agreed. We were kind of waiting in that range for the guys you just listed, right? 12th to 14th round. A lot of second basemen going Albies, Horner, Lau, Polanco. It was about that range last year, but you also had Michael Garcia was falling down to that point, right? And we kind of agreed that was our plan for second base, is wait on that group and get the guy we like the best out of that group at second base. And it's almost going to be that way, it appears. Things will settle down, things will move after a handful of these earliest drafts, and then we'll have ADP and people will start adjusting what they're doing based on that. So maybe a couple of the guys bump up, but yeah, when we're only seeing, 3 or 4 guys eligible at second base taken in the first 10 rounds of a draft, that's kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Overall, cool. Overall, I think as far as let's move into pitching, right? We say this every year. We see this every year. Pitching gets bumped up, especially in the NFBC later on in the season, especially during the main event, right? In main events, 15-teamer, fab, different, very different format from what we're drafting here today. That being said, we've got 4 starting pitchers. We'll count Hunter Brown. 5 starting pitchers going in the first 25 picks of this draft. That seems a little light. I would expect they're going to be a pretty big jump as the season kind of moves along. Overall, do you kind of see that happening as well, or do you think that there's going to be this will be the one year we kind of break the mold and start seeing, people go hitter heavy in the first 3 rounds?
I think there's been enough talk the past couple seasons by a lot of us that maybe I don't need my first pitcher to be quite as early, but in general, I want some of the rest of my pitching a little earlier. But as draft season goes along, we're going to lose a couple of these guys. It's inevitable. Some of these guys are going to either we don't know about an injury yet, or they're going to suffer one in the offseason, early in spring training. And so once it gets later, the last couple of weeks before the season starts, when people are really drafting heavy, it gets to that point where they're going to move up. Absolutely. There's going to be less of them, and we're to the point where, okay, now the season's going to start and these guys are healthy. We can go ahead and bump them up around. We're not worried about an off-season injury any longer. And then just the fear of missing out. I need an ace attitude, I think, plays a big role in that as well. So, yeah, I think there's several reasons that we'll see a move up as draft season goes along, just like we typically do.
All right, let's stay with pitchers. But of course, go to everybody's favorite. We'll go to closers, especially in a draft and hold. It's just a mind-numbing experience drafting closers in a draft and hold, right? I did notice you went back to back. I mean, on the early end of a round and then the end of a round. Was that by design? You got two guys who should hold their closing positions on their respective teams, on winning teams or expected to be winning teams. Trevor McGill in Milwaukee, Carlos Estevez in Kansas City, beginning of the seventh, end of the eighth round, and not a whole lot of closers. As I'm all right, let's just get this one out of the way. After you picked Estevez, Emmanuel Clase goes in the middle of the ninth round. Was that?
There's been a lot of auto picks from that team, and that was one of them. Okay. I don't think he'd have went there.
Okay, that's a great. Yeah. There you go. That
I should have brought that up earlier because I knew that was going to come up. Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's tough, and we'll get into another one. You get into the idea of drafting early without having all the news about all the players quite yet. Random surgery happens in the middle of November that you didn't know was coming. A team ends up cutting a player or signing another free agent, blocking one of their current players. You didn't really. Maybe the Royals go out and get a top end closer, and then all of a sudden Carlos Estevez is not the closer anymore. Like, we don't know everything that's going to happen throughout the offseason. Emmanuel Clase is a borderline on that. We were hearing rumors that there's a possibility Emmanuel Clase will never play in the major leagues again, with a possibility of a lifetime ban at least being thrown out there. That leads, whatever, terrible segue, but we'll just jump into it. We'll go down another 10 rounds, and we see that I'm not going to pronounce his name because I didn't look it up yet. Kazuma Okamoto. I think I got that. He was drafted right there. He was like the third of the expected posted players from Japan to be drafted in your draft, a couple rounds after Murakami. And then about a day later, after we were kind of doing some snooping or figuring out when this was drafted, and then when we started seeing posts that it's not expected that Okamoto will be posted anymore by the Giants in Japan, the Japan-based Giants. So I went a really long, like, weird route to get back to the closer situation, but like drafting closers is a lot like that. It's like you just don't know, no matter how good the player is, what their role is going to be on opening day, halfway through the season, after the trade deadline. So how do you prioritize that in this kind of a format, or how did you decide it, and will you stray from that in future drafts?
Well, so I wasn't necessarily intending on going back-to-back closers, but taking Trevor McGill as my first closer this time of year, I do have questions. Uribe was really good down the stretch, and McGill was used more and more often. We know McGill had injury issues and some up and down anyway. I tend to agree with you. I think the job is fairly safe going into the season, but after I made that pick is when I started questioning it in that way, rather than before I made the pick, which would have been ideal. So at that point, I decided that I I wanted a guy that I was confident that had the job. And we had taken Carlos Estevez in the pitcher list mock draft. And when we took him, of the guys that were remaining, he was the guy that we were both confident has the job going into 2026 as of right now. You mentioned, yes, it is possible the Royals would bring in someone else. I think that's highly unlikely. With a fairly deep bullpen already, Urseg coming back as well, some others, I believe. So they're going to stick with Estevez. He got the job done for him 42 times this season. He led the league. So I'm not expecting 42. I expect him to have the job. And at that point, Class A was the next one. Jeff Hoffman was still available, and Robert Suarez, Raisel Iglesias, the next three closers taken. All of them have questions. Is the job going to be theirs going next season? I feel more confident in Estevez having the job going into 2026 than with those other three. It was almost like I was attempting to recover from a mistake. If the McGill pick was not a mistake, then I'm pretty well set. I'd be happy with these two guys if they're the closers all year long.
So the only thing that stands out to me, I agree. We picked Estevez in that mock draft as well, as our RP1, I think, actually. Oh no, we had Hader. We got Hader.
Yeah, we had Hader
earlier on. Estevez, and this is the thing in the draft and hold that I'd be looking at, especially if I'm going to get a closer early-ish, top 10 rounds even. What does their contract look like? And there's a lot of different layers to this, right? You look at a really young guy who's still arbitration eligible. Is that going to dictate what his role will be throughout the season? In Estevez's case, this is the last year on his contract that's guaranteed. They have a team option for the 2027 season, or going into 2027. So if God forbid your Royals kind of tank it out and they realize, hey, this is somebody that we could get something for at the trade deadline, there's obviously no guarantee that Estevez keeps a closer role moving into a different role. In a draft and hold, maybe he's still having that job for the first 3 months of the season, if not more, gets you that position where it's like, hey, that's fine. But do you then start considering handcuffing him when you get to the point in a draft and hold where you're just like throwing darts at a wall with pitchers, when one of those darts ends up being next in line in Kansas City? Or whoever the closer is that we're having the conversation about? Does that start becoming part of your strategy? We talk about handcuffing a lot in general throughout draft season, but this is one of those where I think it could really make a big difference. There's no fab. Like in a fab league, I got no problem drafting somebody like this because I can start speculating in June, in July, the situations a little bit more clearly, right? So you can start speculating a little bit more directly. In a draft and hold, you're stuck. You have to kind of look at in the future. In this case, it's like 10 months down the line, not just 1 or 2. So do you start thinking about that when you are drafting somebody like Estevez in that situation? God forbid, you don't need to use that dart, but like the players that we're always talking about, they can still be helpful to kind of fill a gap, and you're probably not drafting him until round 45 or so anyway.
Yeah, I think one of the minor adjustments, and it's not going to be a complete, 100% change how I've done it in the past, but on a couple of my later picks in my draft and holds, rather than trying to speculate on a starting pitcher, whether it be a dart on somebody coming back from injury, which I have made those picks in the past, and that we say it every year. We all do. I'm done with the injured players, and it depends on, and we all have an extent to our tolerance for that risk, and we all claimed that we're going to be less tolerant the following year than whatever our tolerance is, I think. And I think that's where I'm at. No more the Brandon Woodruff from this past year, right? He obviously was earlier in a draft, but someone like that, I don't think I want on my roster, especially in a draft and hold. Also, the speculation on young pitchers coming up. They can be great. That's why we spend so much on them in fab throughout the season in fab leagues. But I just have not. I have not done well at picking guys that do end up getting innings at the major league level. I'd rather have, for this example we were using with Estevez, a Lucas Urseg on my roster, who I can use anyway. We talk about these guys every week throughout the season when we're talking our ratios category. If he doesn't get me saves, yeah, that's not ideal. I was hoping, but the problem is it's not always those guys that take over the job if you lose the number one guy. So you have to be careful that you're not counting on if Estevez does get injured or does get traded away or just performs poorly, the guy you handcuff him with may not be the closer. Urseg, they like using, the Kansas City Royals like using him in high leverage situations. And maybe someone else is the ninth inning guy. So you have to be careful with that. But that's why I say it's not going to be 100% change. But I think a couple of my later picks in draft and holds, both 12 and 15 teamers, will be relievers that I think would be allowed to have ninth inning opportunities if the guy ahead of them goes down or is no longer on the team, but that I can use anyway, because we absolutely, even if you lose the first guy, you don't know that that's going to be the guy that takes his spot. So yeah, I am going to make that move in a couple of spots in all of my draft and holds this season, I believe. But I'm also, it's not all or nothing. It's going to be a gradual switch.
I'm trying to find a player on this draft board. Again, this is only the first 25 rounds, and I think you just finished up the 26th round. That's not being shown here, so we're just looking at the first half. And I'm really trying to look. I'm looking for players that ultimately you feel as though people just forgot about them. Like all of a sudden they come across your board and you're looking at your draft board and you're using rooms that obviously don't have ADP, or if they do have ADP, it's like 2025 like ADP is still in there, or it doesn't exist at all. And so any names like that kind of like you realize, wow, I'm not sure how they dropped, where, how they got there, how I missed them. And yeah, the names like that. The one, I don't think necessarily it's a name like we talked about Michael Harris as being somebody, Michael Harris II being as somebody who was going in, I think it was, the 4-5 turn, sometimes a 2-3 turn. And you talked about him being somebody, probably not that interested in him in 12s, but I will jump him up in 15s just because I do expect the consistency to be there, especially in a 5 outfield. But this was this is still, he went in the beginning of the 10th round here, right after George Springer, Kyle Stowers, right before Suzuki and Andy Pages, later, a couple of picks later in the same round, Taylor Ward at the end of the round as well, as far as outfielders go, right? Do you think that is somebody, is that too late? And compared to what you were talking about earlier, I know there's another name on here that I'll let you bring up directly that kind of really talks about, I don't know why this player was still available this late, or at least it surprised you. But first, your take on Michael Harris going there. Do you think that's about right? Or do you think we'll start seeing him inch up throughout just because of what he, what I think a lot of people think he could still bring to the table?
Yeah. Based on what you just said and the way we had talked about Michael Harris II last week or the week before, this was about right for me personally. It was where I was starting to look at him. That group. So the last player you mentioned, Taylor Ward, I drafted him. Ahead of him in my queue, I had George Springer, Michael Harris II, and Seiya Suzuki, and Andy Podges. And I really thought Podges was going to get to me. Taylor Ward was, I was, it was the 10th round. I had one outfielder, and he's got some question marks, Jackson Merrill. Right. I took him toward at the end of the 6th round. I thought that was a far enough drop for some of the struggles we saw this year. Also, I think when you prorate his stats to a per plate appearance basis, he wasn't nearly as far behind last season as people might have thought. So I did go ahead and grab Jackson Merrill there, but now I was and then I was, as I said earlier, not taking my first pitcher earlier, but then taking pitching earlier. I took from the 4th through the 9th round, 5 of those 6 picks were pitchers.
Right.
So I was like, oh, I need to get back in this outfield pool here. So in that case, for me, Michael Harris was in about the right spot at the time I had him queued up. I do think that in 15 teamers, he'll go earlier, because I do think that a lot of fantasy players will have that same take that I brought up last week, that in a 15-team league over the season, what his final numbers are all we care about. In a 12-team league, he's somebody that you're gonna not want in your lineup a lot of weeks. So 11th round's kind of early for that, or 10th round even.
Yeah, I think a lot of the early chatter last year going into drafts was outfield seem really thin. Make sure you get some outfield, especially in a 5 outfielder league, right? This doesn't feel that same way. Just looking at this board, it doesn't feel like the same kind of priority needs to, or is being given. The plenty of teams on this board have 2 or 3 outfielders by the 10th round rolls around. There's one team that doesn't take their first outfielder until the 9-10 turn, and they go back to back with Springer and Stowers. And honestly, that seems fine. That seems as good of a way to start your outfield as the team right next to them, who started off with Jordan Alvarez in the 3rd round and went Michael Harris right after that. So it's like basically the same pairing, just with different age ranges. And just because of injury concerns and all that. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like the same kind of, need or like sense of urgency is there around that position. Did you feel similarly, or did you have a little bit more time to kind of look into that as far as the outfield position specifically goes?
With outfield, yes, I agree. It gets pretty thin when we're drafting and looking for full-time players. Throughout the season, I am comfortable streaming outfielders. There's so many of them that platoon. So there's going to be matchups every week that make an outfielder appealing somewhere. Sure. So I'm not going to completely wait on outfield and ignore it. But I mentioned earlier, I'm the only team that only has 4 outfielders so far. I'm not that worried about it. I'm comfortable streaming outfield throughout the season because there's so many of them that platoon, and depending on the matchups, there'll be guys available each week.
Yeah. I mentioned like that one team waited until the 9th round. There's another team right in the middle of the draft that gets their first one in the 3rd round, Pete Crow Armstrong, but then waits until the 14th round to grab Trent Grisham. They caught up to you and then passed you. Like you said, you're the only team with 4 outfielders. They do have 5, but they sure did wait quite a while to kind of fill that 5th outfield spot later on. This is also, unfortunately, the same team that drafted Okamoto. So they might have, we'll see. They might change. The Giants might change their mind. They might actually post him. We'll see. But he might also be without their 20th round pick. You had a name that you mentioned to me earlier, and this happened, well, similarly in our mock draft to a different player, But talk to me about why you think Jeremy Pena fell to you where he did, and then why you decided, hey, the 12th round Pena for my middle infielder was the good time, because you already have Bobby Witt Jr. filling up your shortstop spot.
Yeah, it just I'd seen a couple other draft boards and seen that he was going, 6th, 7th round. I had Bobby Witt Jr. as the second overall pick, so I hadn't really been looking at shortstop, as I mentioned. If Mookie Betts, he had a long ways to go, but if he'd have fallen further, I definitely would have grabbed a second shortstop there. And once I had gotten my third outfielder, and I realized that Jeremy Pena was still available, I moved him to the top of the queue and did not expect him to make it all the way back to me 20 picks later. But he did. Not a single shortstop was taken in that range. It's really, I do think he that Jeremy Pena kind of got forgotten about in this draft, and that can happen when we don't have ADP early in the season. And because I think he was drafted in the 400s last season, something like that. So he's way down the lists. People aren't seeing him when they're just looking by position in the draft room, unless they've put their own rankings in before the draft. Um, it was surprising to me. We talked because of when we took Geraldo Perdomo in the pitcher list mock draft,
Right.
And he went the first pick of the 7th round here, and I feel like they should be going approximately the same range. Trevor Story and CJ Abrams went the round ahead of Perdomo, and then Bo Bichette and Corey Seager, the two players taken between Perdomo and Pena. I think I'd rather have Pena than those two guys with the health question marks for Seager. And yeah, Bo Bichette did have a bit of a bounce back yet, but we don't see the speed out of him any longer. Well, he actually did end up stealing some bases, but I think the Bo Bichette hype, and I'm completely getting sidetracked here. I think is because he was so much better than he had been in 2024. I still wasn't that impressed with what he did in 2025, as far as a fantasy asset at the shortstop position. So, yeah, I felt like Pena got forgot about here and could have been taken at least 4 rounds earlier, if not earlier than that.
Let's just move Bichette over to second base, and then let him jump up a couple of rounds just because of that.
There you go. Exactly.
As I kind of again move around the board and kind of, I was very curious to see where he would go in our mock draft. I'm interested to get your take on whether or not you'll start seeing him move up in this format as well, especially with the 5 outfielders. I'm talking about Chandler Simpson, and we talk about rabbits a lot throughout the offseason. Simpson pretty much is that, where if he sticks at the top of the lineup, of course, he can also score runs. I mean, he's going to manufacture his own runs in general as well. But who I don't see, and this is, again, only the first 25 rounds, that I'm arguably more interested in because of the news that coming out of Yankees camp that they might be without their starting shortstop, is Jose Caballero. At least for the first 2 months of the season, having regular playing time for the Yankees. I might be more because of the position eligibility in that lineup, and the rate at which he actually ran, Caballero, that is. I might end up being more interested in him in comparison to Simpson. But just the idea of rabbits, there's not a whole lot of rabbits that I'm seeing being focused on at all, because the rabbits that have been kind of proven themselves to be more than just rabbits like at least talking 3 categories instead of just 1 or 2, with batting average, runs scored, and steals. Maybe they're also, at least serviceable in the RBI category as well. We're talking like Brace Terrain with a little bit of pop and things like that, and players like that. Is Simpson worth a mid 20, a 20th, 21st pick in a 12-teamer with 5 outfielders because of what he can do in that one category?
He can be, and it takes a plan, and you're drafting that way. Then I'm all about it. Nico Horner is almost that player. What are we getting? 6, 7 home runs out of him for the past 3 seasons each year. So, and I drafted him. I think it's, if you have a plan for that guy, meaning you're getting your home runs and RBI for somewhere else, to enough to make up for it, then sure, I'm all about those types of players. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's really tough to grab one of those guys just because they're falling, though, because it's somebody you should have been planning on and structuring your team that way before you draft him. So just because you see him falling, you don't want to, in my opinion, jump for him. But Caballero was actually first pick of the 24th round there, and I was very interested. He does maintain the 4 position eligibilities: second, third, short, and outfield for 2026. That makes it, especially in a draft and hold, a player like him that much more appealing. And so, yeah, absolutely. Actually, I was a little surprised he was still available at that point.
Yeah. Just because of the position eligibility. Sure. All right. I'm going to pivot a little bit only because the name just popped out to me. It kind of molds into what I want to talk about, also molding in what I talked about earlier with not knowing the news, right? I saw a report that St. Louis, and I don't know if I saw this through Zimmerman's Mining the News, which is back to regular rotation, by the way. Should be, if you can make a notification for those popping up, you should. But at least just check every day and see if he's got a new one. He does them quite a bit throughout the offseason. Or if it was just a tweet. So I don't want to give credit where it wasn't done, but it was probably through Mining the News. That St. Louis is not expected to push JJ Weatherholt, one of their top prospects, to the majors in really quickly. The other one I saw, and I don't see him being drafted here, is the top prospect of Texas as well. The name is
Walcott.
Yeah, Walcott. And I actually might be mixing those 2 reports up, but either way, the point is how we always get excited about the next, best thing, but in a draft and hold, especially, like, how much can you allow yourself to be overly excited about the next big thing? Cam Smith is the obvious example here, of somebody. Well, you probably weren't drafting Smith in the top 25 rounds of a draft and hold last year because you didn't see it coming until spring training, right? So unless you drafted your draft and hold in March, it probably wasn't somebody it was on your radar to be excited about because you just didn't think it was going to happen. But in general, unless it's somebody like we drafted Samuel Basallo just now in our draft, and he went in the 17th round, he's already been signed. Like, he already has the contract. Even if he doesn't play every single day, the Orioles are going to put him in the lineup the majority of the time because they're already paying him. There's unless he completely falls on his face in the first month or 2 of the season or in spring training, I don't see them sending him back down. There's more of a guarantee here. No matter how young he is, no matter how inexperienced he is, the money is going to keep him is going to prop him up, or the contract is. These other guys that are pre-arbitration, they haven't even started their clock yet. We have no guarantee that they're going to wow people enough in spring training. What are your overall thoughts on that, especially drafting in October?
I'm much more comfortable with the guys like Vassallo, like um, Jordan Lawler, even Christian Campbell. Even though the performance wasn't what we hoped, I'm much more comfortable with the guys we did see at the major league level. Ryan Bloomfield did some research on this last offseason, and I forget the numbers. I'm not even going to try to guess what they are because I know I'll butcher them. But uh, players at 40th round on, something like that, in draft and holds drafted, the players that had any playing time the previous season are so much more valuable to our fantasy teams the following year than the players that did not have any playing time, whether it was injury related or they were still in the minor leagues. So I think for me, that really, I emphasize that with these young guys coming up. Even if they did not perform well, even if it was only a couple weeks, if we saw them at the major league level, I'm much more comfortable thinking that we will see them, if not to open the 2026 season, very soon thereafter.
Kevin, what was the biggest surprise so far that you of the picks that you made? I mean, besides, you already talked about Jeremy Pena, but of the top 25 rounds, what name are you expecting to bring you at least 2, if not 5 or 6 rounds more value than where you ended up getting them? Or not hoping, expecting?
Jacob Misiorowski. I took him as my third starting pitcher in the 9th round. I am basing many of my starting pitcher picks after Nick Pollock's ranks, which I think many people should do, obviously. And he's ranked higher than the two starting pitchers that I drafted ahead of him, Freddie Peralta and Blake Snell, by Nick Pollock. But I knew I didn't have to take him there.
Sure.
Right. So I was ecstatic when I did finally pull the trigger. When Schwellenbach went, that was my cue. I'm grabbing Misiorowski, and I think he'll give me the value of Peralta and Snell that I took in rounds 4 and 5.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That you just said, it's like when Schwellenbach went, you took that as your cue, and you can really, I mean, it's just about knowing your room and seeing the trends that you're seeing. Even in the 9th round, you're already starting to see trends from different teams, especially in a slow draft where you have a little bit more time to analyze their moves and their roster construction as you're getting into the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th rounds.
And the next starting pitcher I took, same thing. Bubba Chandler. He was right there in Nick's ranks at the time. I thought, wow, he's still here. I thought he would have went a couple of rounds earlier. He could have the same season Misiorowski does.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think the playoff tax is playing for some of these picks? I'm specifically, what made the name that I'm looking at that made me think of this question or this topic is Trey Yeasavage going in the middle of the 13th round, right after Sandy Alcantara, right before Pablo Lopez. And obviously the success that Yeasavage has seen so far, in the Blue Jays are now threatening 2nd and 3rd in the bottom of the 7th with only 1 out, so they could very easily, do some damage here and get back into it. They're only down by 2 currently. Right. Do you think that there is a playoff tax on that pick specifically? And I mean, I'm going to keep scanning around and seeing. I don't think I see Andrew
Maybe
Vaughn
not, because Misiorowski was already gone. Chase Burns was already gone. Another young one. I took Chandler a couple rounds later. That's probably the 4 guys kind of in that group. Mm-hmm. I would think, and they're all gone at that point. Not too much. I paid a playoff tax, I think. Actually, I don't know if I paid a playoff tax. I made a pick that I'm not going to make anymore in draft season. Probably. We talked we talked the last couple of weeks about, just like last season, there's a lot of these first basemen. They may not be 5 category guys, but they're going to get us our 30 and 100 with a 250-ish or maybe even better batting average. And I take Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in the second round. It's just so hard not to. He's so fun to watch, and he's been doing so much this postseason. I'm like, oh, are we going to see 40 out of him again? Maybe. He's still only 26 years old.
Right.
Yeah, all of that is great, and he's a fine draft pick there, but for roster construction, I don't think there's any reason to be taking a first baseman yet there, but I did it anyway.
We were talking a lot about it during the beginning stages of that mock draft as well.
Mhm.
And it seems like the only first baseman that anybody really should be considering in the top 3 rounds is Nick Kurtz, who is
Right.
going to go as your top first baseman off the board. At least he did in this draft. I'm pretty sure he was the first baseman off the board in our mock draft as well. But every single first baseman, or at least primarily first baseman, that people are considered drafting in the top 5 rounds, are not getting you anything in the stolen base category. Some of them are not locks for a helpful batting average. They might not hurt you. But like, should we be expecting Bryce Harper to be a 250 or go back to a possible 280 hitter? Do we think Rafael Devers is also going to make that jump? Like, you don't, Pete Alonso, like, none of these players I can lock in pen with a, helpful batting average. Now, could they? Yeah, sure, they could, but I'm not etching it in stone. And I'm not going to make my, so I agree. What is the ultimate difference between your 19th round first baseman pick, Christian Walker, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? Yes, there are differences. But like, is there 17 rounds worth of difference between the two? And could you have focused on second base? Could you have focused on a different position that you could have made more of a difference in? And that was what we were talking about, as we still don't have a first baseman in that mock draft. No, that's right. We drafted Salvi basically as our first baseman, because it's a one catcher league, and we can do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I mean, that kind of nails it.
Here's what I started thinking about all of that you just said. I've thought about this a lot. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm pretty happy with my team. I like the way it's looking so far. What if I'd have done something else with that pick? Hey, I don't even have to replace him, right? Like you said, would I be okay with Christian Walker and Jake Berger, one of those two in my lineup at first base each week? Yeah, I probably would be at this point. So it's not about even trading to get a different first baseman within the next few picks. It's just like, what if I just took somebody completely different? What if I did take a starting pitcher there? The next 2 that went were Yamamoto and Hunter Brown. What if I had grabbed one of those guys? That's kind of where I went. Not just the fact that I could have waited on second base. It's like, how much better would my team be if I'd have just done something completely different right there? And I'm not so sure what my answer is. I think if Garrett Crochet had slipped, that would have been the answer. But once you get past those top 3, Skubal, Skeens, Crochet, I don't think I want a starting pitcher at the end of the second round. So the more I talk about it, the more I'm happy that I took Vladimir Guerrero Jr., because I'm happy with my team without him. And then adding a player like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to that team can't help but make it better.
Yeah, I wonder if it's. I'm looking. You look at the second round or the third round, really, because those are all the players you could have taken, right? And there's a pair of first basemen. You were solid at shortstop, so the other three shortstops that weren't really. Do you push Ketel Marte up to fill second base early, or I mean, the name that pops up to me that I would have considered maybe would be James Wood, just because, again, outfield, you already have question marks with Jackson Merrill later on.
Mm-hmm.
So if all of a sudden, James Wood becomes your OF1, and now you have 5 outfielders, right? As you mentioned, like, you don't have 5 outfielders yet. You got your boy Jacques Caglione later on. He becomes your 5th outfielder instead of your 4th outfielder, and you've got to feel a little bit better in general with that. Or, I mean, if you're into Pete Crow Armstrong in his first half versus his second half, then, fine as well. I probably jump James Wood over PCA personally. But, either way, outfield would have been the only thing besides, starting pitcher. But to your point, there's nobody I feel like super comfortable taking at the back end of the second round where I'm just like, yes, beyond the guys that you already mentioned.
I think this is something that warrants me diving deeper into, is the fact that if I have an early pick in a draft, that 2-3 turn, I really don't know who I like.
Right.
I think because by that point, we're to the point, okay, none of these are guys that I would have taken in the first round. And the guys that I think I would push up more than maybe other fantasy players, I don't have to take yet in the second round. Right. And I have another pick 3 picks later, the second pick of the third round. So this area right here, and I pushed up William Contreras. No doubt in my mind, I could have got William Contreras at the end of the 4th round. Another catcher did not go until the 6th round, and that was Hunter Goodman. And in some drafts, he's going ahead of William Contreras. I've never been shy about the fact I'm all about an early catcher, especially in the 2 catcher leagues. So I was fine with that pick. But that second, third round, I do acknowledge that a lot of players would have done a lot different things there. I just don't know there's anything else I'm comfortable with doing. There's not a lot of players I'm really fond of at that point.
And that's a good thing to know about yourself too. It's like, where are you comfortable? You're gonna hear a lot of conversations throughout the offseason about, like, hey, where do you want your pick to be? It's usually one of the questions when Nick Pollock does the interviews about our mock drafts. He'll always ask, like, did you pick this draft slot? Because we all get to just randomly pick. It's first come, first serve. Did you pick this spot for any particular reason, any kind of strategy? And honestly, you don't know. You don't know at this point in the offseason and draft season until you actually finish a draft and feel it, and they feel the comfort level. In ultimately, is a top 3 pick just so you can get that top choice in the first round worth the uncomfortableness that you felt ultimately on the 2-3 turn? And maybe in 2 or 3 months, when different drafts have happened in different formats, you've done some, you might feel a little bit differently. But what I'm hearing is, at this moment, probably not. So would you have been more comfortable after it's all said and done with a 5th or 6th pick, like right in the middle? This is a 12-teamer after all. I mean, you talked about you considered Juan Soto at the number 2 spot anyway. He went 5. Jose Ramirez, perfectly fine pick, especially if you're worried about third base anyway. And their pairings, Garrett Crochet, Junior Caminero, are, I feel very good about those pairings personally. So do you think that in the middle of a round here, you'd be a little bit more comfortable, or would you have rather have been even further down on like the 1-2 turn instead?
I think, well, at the time when I set my KDS, I set it 3-2-1. I wanted Ohtani, Witt, or Judge. In hindsight, I could have easily made that 4-3-2-1, because like I said, Juan Soto, I think, is in that group now. I agree with you. Jose Ramirez, when our first round pick came up in the pitcher list mock, Corbin Carroll, Julio Rodriguez. I think we're going to see those two guys go back to back in a lot of drafts. I think those are nice, solid mid first round picks for everybody. Then we're going to see the top pitchers go. I think my KDS, typically in the past, I feel it from the inside out and maybe lean a little more towards the early first round pick than the late. I think I'd rather be, on the 2-3 turn than all the way at the 1-2 turn. But I typically fill my KDS out from the middle out, and I will go back to that going forward this draft season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, KDS is something you just always going to be tweaking throughout draft season, especially when you start drafting in October, and then all of a sudden you just feel you see something completely different. Plus, we're going to see injury. Unfortunately, knock on wood, we're going to see injuries. We're going to get news. We're going to get signings, et cetera, et cetera. So, I keep getting drawn back to the top of the draft board, Kevin. Keep me in our wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. Keep pushing me back down. I took a screenshot of this. If anybody looking at home, why there's a line down in the middle after the 20th round, it's just because there was two files put together. I tried to screenshot into one thing. Look below the line, Kevin. Besides the picks that you made, or you can include your picks, whatever. What is there overall, like a name in here or a group of like a type of names that you expect to jump above the line as we continue to move throughout draft season?
I think Jose Caballero, who you talked about with the news, I think he'll get pushed up. Plus, as draft season goes along and we see more and more drafts, there's going to be those drafting that really try to hoard stolen bases if they can. So I think that is a good one. Big question mark for me, and probably for a lot of us, is I don't think we'll see Tristan Casas in this spot. I think we either see him move up quite a bit if we get a lot of good news, or no news or bad news, he drops even further.
Sure.
I don't know that we'll see a lot of Tristan Casas in this spot. One guy, and I think the starting pitchers, right? So many starting pitchers, like Bailey Ober, as bad as he was, we've seen him much better. Right? What are we thinking about Bailey Ober? If Bailey Ober's anything close to 2024, 21st round is a steal, right? Mark Vientos, we talked about his playing time last week, 23rd round. That could end up being a steal based on playing time, but we have those questions still. So I don't think there's really an obvious one. I think the biggest one for me, and another speed guy who didn't have nearly the number of stolen bases as last season, but Xavier Edwards, he's still at 27 with a decent batting average. I think those speed guys will probably move up.
Yeah, just as I'm looking around the board, I'm going to correct myself from earlier. JJ Weatherholt was not the subject of that report that I was talking about how they wouldn't push him up. It was Walcott from Texas specifically. Okay. Doesn't mean that I feel any more comfortable with JJ Weatherholt making that jump on opening day as well, but worth it. Tristan Casas' definite name did pop out at me here, just being on the board in the top 25 rounds in general. He was, for those listening, middle of the 24th round in this 12-team draft. We only have one pick left in our mock draft. I wouldn't be opposed to throwing a dart here. Again, it's a mock draft, so you can throw much as you want in those kind of situations. But we also
just got to be able to explain it to Nick. That's
yeah,
all.
right. When he asks you about it. When you don't have a solid first baseman, again, we have Basallo, we
Right.
have Salvi. But in that head-to-head league, I love having the flexibility of making sure that we have a body in every position on every single day that games are being played. Basallo went again 2-team league, 2-catcher league, went in the end of the 17th round. You do focus normally on, at least last year, was a big part of your focus was getting 2 catchers that can ultimately get you 600 plate appearances or more. You probably got that with William Contreras, but you waited quite a while to get the second one with Logan O'Hoppe making a comeback in Anaheim. Is that more indicative of you having confidence in O'Hoppe, or it's just, again, the way the cards ended up falling and it was the best possible solution at the time?
I felt that I needed a little bit of a power boost at that point, and of the catchers that were remaining, and I was shocked. I thought I'd be drafting Carter Jensen of the Kansas City Royals as my third catcher a few rounds later. And so when him and Tyler Stevenson went, I was like, okay, I at least need my second catcher that I'm going to have to put in a lineup on a weekly basis here. And I was also felt like I could use a little bit of a power boost. So in spite of the batting average, Logan O'Hoppe was actually, I was really happy that he was available at that point.
Mm-hmm. But not enough to jump up other guys that are more likely to have the 600 plate appearances. Like, as much as he's getting in the age, Salvi's still going to be playing every single day. He still fits the bill. You've got, Will Smith with all his injuries last year and just dealing with it. He might still get back up to, I don't know. LA is a different beast now as far as like being able to fill in the extra plate appearances within the DH spot. Obviously, you can't do that. So Ben Rice is kind of the obvious one as well, but are there Hunter Goodman maybe? Who else do you see hitting 600 plate appearances in the catcher position? It seems like there's a lot left this year. Yeah.
Yes, there are less, but I think and people are drafting them accordingly. I think it's some of the young guys, right? Drake Baldwin and Agustin Ramirez both went in the 8th round, right? Ivan Herrera into the 10th round. Although those guys all went ahead of guys like Salvador Perez and way ahead of Adley Rutschman. Kyle Teal went ahead of Adley Rutschman. Right. I think these young guys are the guys that we're going to see getting those plate appearances. I just wasn't ready to pull the trigger on them.
It's tough. Last year, we had a trio of DH only or UT only, whatever you want to call it, players in Marcell Ozuna, Brent Rooker, and Kyle Schwarber. Rooker has the outfield eligibility now, so he doesn't fit the bill. But looking at this board, they have definitely split. They're nowhere near each other, and they probably won't be, with Schwarber going in the 2nd round, Rooker going in the 6th round, and Ozuna, who doesn't have a team. Now, that plays a role, of course, in the 14th round. Should that be tighter? Like, are these players that well? I don't even know if I should ask that question. I was gonna say, are these players that much? Are they that far apart? When you look at, that's a 6th round to an 8-round difference between Rooker and Ozuna. Are they 8 rounds apart just because of the position eligibility? Ozuna doesn't have a team, and that's it. Those are the differences.
I think that's it. And yeah, it's probably about right. I had thought about Ozuna a couple times, and I just wasn't comfortable with the Ozuna pick, with him not having a team. We've seen him be pretty streaky throughout his career, and he had some great seasons with other teams, but it really all came together in Atlanta. So I have questions how he'll perform, plus the age, all of that. You know, Schwarber probably went a little later than I thought he
Right.
might. I
Yeah.
think he probably earlier second round in a lot of drafts.
Yeah. I think we took him earlier in our second round. Just because he also has Yahoo's a fun place to play because somebody like Kyle Schwarber
Outfield.
always has outfield eligibility. Ozuna has outfield eligibility in Yahoo because Yahoo has a weird rule where nobody except for Otani can be DH only. And if they've even played the field once, they will keep that position throughout their career until they play another position, even if they're DH only. Yeah. Anyway, uh, I is Ozuna the type of player that says, you know what, I'm just gonna go play. I'm gonna play the last couple of years in Japan.
Very
Yeah.
possible. If that's who offers him more money, yes.
I mean, obviously, with
That's the type of player I think he is. He's
I mean,
going where he gets the most money.
I wonder. I mean, he's DH only. He's not playing the outfield anywhere. He's not playing the field in most places. And with his, backstory and with all the things off the field that I'm sure you've all heard about at this point. I wonder how much of a market there will be for that profile of a player. And we've seen this happen in the past, where they're just like, fine, if there's not the market, I'll find another market and I'll just ride off into the sunset, playing for a different league. And that'll be interesting. This is also that same team that you mentioned earlier that had a lot of auto picks. I don't know if this one qualifies as an auto pick here, but maybe he would have fallen a little bit more otherwise. Let's just talk about your last pick here, unless there's anything else that kind of stands out for you. Only because you texted me about it right before you made the pick, and we talked about it already at the beginning of the show, just second base in general. You grabbed Kristen Campbell in the 25th round. I am tempted to say that this is a nice little steal. And I think that Kristen Campbell is going, I mean, you won't know for sure until March, what the Red Sox are going to do with him. But I do believe he is a very key part of the future for the Boston Red Sox, whether that is in the middle infield or even as an outfield option or as a utility player. So I think that this was a pretty good pick here, and I will not be surprised to see random drafts jumping him up, especially with the second base situation that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, we had gotten to the point. I think you mentioned it earlier. And I did as well. Nico Horner, my only second baseman at this point. I already had 3 first basemen, 3 shortstops, 4 outfielders. Looking good on pitching. I feel like I'm looking good on pitching. I'm comfortable with my pitching. And the 2 catchers, as you said. And when I was looking at second base, and this is the point where I started noticing that a couple of seasons ago, we would talk about the fact that there was so many second base eligible players.
Right.
And in spite of our talk about second base last season, there was still a lot of guys that had eligibility there. And a lot of the multi-eligibility guys lost their second base eligibility. So at this point in the draft, for my starting to get in on a second baseman, because I already had 3 shortstops, so my middle infield I'm covered. But with it being a draft and hold, I'm going to have at least 3 of these guys, probably 4. And do I really want Tommy Edman? Maybe, but at this point, 25th round of a draft, that's where I'll start taking risks like this. Kind of like what I said about where Casas will be drafted. I think he moves up or drops down. Christian Campbell is not going to end up as a 25th round player. He's going to be a 5th round player or shouldn't be rostered. right?
Sure.
That's the way I look at it. So in the 25th round, that's what I'm willing to take that shot.
Yeah. When you get to those middle 20 round, this is where you, like you mentioned, you're focused on your backups at every position. Whatever position you don't have a backup in, that's where you're drafting. And you picked, Mason Wynn right before that. So this is your third short. Actually, he's still your backup shortstop because Pena is probably in your middle infield spot. Right. And so there you have all these other roster spots you have to consider as well. Campbell becomes your first man off the bench currently, unless he gains outfield eligibility, and then now all of a sudden he's your fifth outfielder. And so you just don't know how the Red Sox are going to end up using him. There was, he was close to getting outfield eligibility. At least it looked like he could, as they were trying to figure out a way for him to be on the roster. And so, there's always that possibility as well.
And you know what? So 2 rounds later, I just made my 27th round pick. And this is insurance for my 25th and 26th round picks. I took Christian Campbell and Jordan Lawler. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They are my second baseman and my second third baseman in this draft. Either one of those guys may not even be on a team in 2026.
It fit the mold in both. Yeah.
27th round, I just drafted Jonathan India. He covers both those spots. Now, as long as one of them makes it, I'm covered. So it affects what you do later on in the draft. I took a very boring, very safe as far as playing time, huge bounce back candidate, in my opinion, not in terms of he's not going to hit 20 home runs or steal 20 bases, but he's going to hit better than 250 and probably get to double-digit home runs. So Jonathan India, and get my runs and RBIs. Jonathan India, very safe as far as playing time guy to back up the 2 risks I just took.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that's not shown on this board that I think we could close off with is the difference that you are in strategy when it comes to you've filled up your spot. We're talking about guys that you are drafting as your backups, but we're also looking at drafting guys in the next 15 rounds that you would be normally looking at picking up in free agency if this was a fab league, trading for, I don't know, whatever, like just adding them to your rosters as the season goes on. How much risk are you willing to take on throughout the next 15 rounds to, hit the next big, to fill gaps that you think you might have done in the first 10 or 15 rounds of drafting, to hit it big? Like, is that even, that's not the point of those last 15 rounds. But it's tempting, right? It's always tempting. How much temptation are you willing to allow yourself to have?
Not much more. I have 2 of those guys, right, already. Christian Campbell, Jordan Lawler. That's a couple guys. Like I said, I'm more comfortable because we saw them in 2025. That helps quite a bit for me. But this is where the draft and hold drafts. I'm going old, boring guys. Multi-position eligibility makes them even more appealing of the old, boring guys because, yeah, they're backups. And at this point, other than outfield, and we talked about that, I'm comfortable streaming outfielders. I have a backup at every position now. So now I'm old and boring, filling in, and that includes pitching. Old, boring guys, guys that I am really confident are going to play. Could I add 1 or 2 more risky guys? Sure, but I'm close. I'm close to my limit. I would say 2 to 4 of these types of players is where I'm at.
Not I'm nobody listening is shocked to hear you say any of that. I know I'm not. But yeah, how many pitchers do you focus on to fill out your bench in a 50 round draft and hold versus backup hitters?
So I typically, let me make sure my numbers add up. I like four players players at each infield position. So there's my 16, not including catcher. I'm down to 3 on catchers in draft and holds. I started doing that the last year or two. If I have only 1 or even no healthy catchers, probably so be it, unless there's somebody that I think might surprise us with a call up or something, or a veteran that I think is going to get more playing time than others expect, and otherwise they wouldn't be available. But typically then I'm only at 3 catchers, so that gets me to 19, and I like 10 outfielders. That leaves me 21 pitchers is usually where I'm at. Minimum 20, sometimes 22, but right around 21 is my goal.
Yeah. Nice to have the target, right? You start adding that up, and you're like, oh,
and like I said, I'm gonna do more. Even if I don't think they would be the saves guy, if one of my closers goes down, I'm doing more relievers than spec starters as well.
If you're a spec on something, yeah, that could actually probably help you. And then if you're going to spec, will you focus? And this is one of the first things I brought up. Will you spec on the relievers that'll end up being the handcuffs to your closers that you drafted in the early rounds? Or is that not important?
I'll take it into consideration. Like I said, I'm going to be careful not to put too much weight on it, though.
Yeah, fair. Yep. Cool. Kevin, anything else you want to close out here? Because this was fun. I mean, we decided on this topic like an hour before we were going to start recording, and we were like, all right, great.
This is a blast. And I know we often talk about, nobody cares about our fantasy teams. But this time of year, this is a lot of what we're going to see and read about and talk about is draft boards, right? So hopefully we discussed the rest of the board enough that we weren't just concentrating on my team. But no, this is amazing. This is so helpful to me. Hopefully it's helpful to the listeners, right? Just talking through it. Right. A lot of us can't call up a buddy and talk about it because we're drafting against them on draft day in our home league. Right. So being able to say things out loud and talk through it is amazing. And so thank you, Adam. This has been great.
Yeah, great. Well, cool. We'll announce, who we pick.
Do this for your first draft as well.
And I will also, we're finishing it up. We're finishing up at the perfect time, because now we can officially congratulate Blue Jay fans for coming back in that 7th inning, as I kind of alluded to earlier, and scoring enough runs to take the lead and held on to the lead. And the game just went final. So
that was when Springer hit the home run. That's when I interrupted you. I don't know if I was like, earlier in the show. That was when Springer hit the home run.
That makes way more sense now. Blue Jays, Dodgers, in the World Series. It should be fun.
Uncle Ted had one question earlier in the show. I did want to get to. He asked about Mon-Fri, because he didn't see him on the draft board, but he was there.
13th.
Yep. End of was that the end or
middle?
First pick or last pick of a round? I thought
middle of the 13th round is what I'm saying.
Middle, smack dab in the middle. 13th round. So yeah, he was gone. And I think when Uncle Ted brought him up, we were talking about players that went slightly later. Maybe it was the Stowers, Michael Harris, Seiya Suzuki range. And I could see Mon-Fri being in that group. So I think, I think Team 5 got a deal here on Mon-Fri.
Yeah. Also ends up being his 3rd outfielder in that situation. Mm-hmm.
With Pages and Soto. I like that. Yeah.
There you go.
And then our Profar. I had Profar queued up. I did. I would have Jurickson Profar, not Aaron Nola, if Profar had made it 3 more picks.
Yeah, that's another name that I think, it's one of the names you just kind of forget about. I forgot about him. You mentioned him we ended up picking him in our mock drafts. She's like, hey, what about this? You're like, well, I like that somebody else. And Profar, I'm like, I totally Profar was completely off of my radar at the time. And so these are the reasons why some people really love drafting early. It's because they feel as though they can get ahead of it. I will say they're far and few between, though, because everybody who's drafting early is drafting early because of this very similar mindset. So just make sure you can act on that when you finally get into the draft room. And don't wait too long. And be like, oh, it's cool. I got this. I see him. Nobody else sees him. And all of a sudden you wait to the 20th round instead of the 19th round. And yeah, you don't need to get 5 rounds worth of value. Just 2 is fine. If you think he's worth that pick, just draft them there. Unless you absolutely know no one's going to grab them. But yeah, either way, Kevin, this was fun. I doubt. Well, you might finish this. You might finish this draft by the time we record next weekend. Maybe we'll just do the back half on the next show. But regardless, with all that and everything else, that's going to do it for episode 235 of On the Wire. Thank you so much for listening. On behalf of Kevin Hastings, I am Adam Howe, and we bid you goodbye.